Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
Have you ever been so captivated by someone that you'd follow them into complete darkness, trusting nothing but the sound of their voice and the warmth of their hand in yours? I'm Alexa Bryant, and at 42, I thought I understood the boundaries of attraction, the sensible limits of desire. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started with an invitation slipped under my gallery door on a Tuesday morning in late September. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that whispered of old money and charitable tax write-offs. The Rio Grande Environmental Foundation cordially invites you to our annual conservation gala. It read in elegant script. What caught my attention wasn't the cause, admirable as it was, but the handwritten note at the bottom. Alexa, your gallery would be perfect for our silent auction display. Would love to discuss over coffee. Sydney Martin, environmental consultant. Sydney Martin, my new neighbor who'd moved into the converted warehouse next to my gallery 3 months ago. The blonde, with legs that went on forever and a smile that could power half of Laredo. The woman who was young enough to be my, younger sister if I'd had one. I'd been watching her, if I'm being honest. Not in a creepy way, but in the way you watch something beautiful and unexpected in your familiar world. She rode a vintage bicycle to work, always carrying a canvas bag filled with what looked like scientific equipment. She wore flowing sundresses that caught the Texas wind, and she had this habit of stopping to examine every plant that grew wild along our street, like she was greeting old friends. At 27, she was 15 years younger than me. 15 years of experience, of mistakes, of learning what I wanted from life. 15 years that should have made her off-limits, inappropriate, a pleasant fantasy, and nothing more. But there was something about the way she'd written my name that made my pulse quicken. Something about the confidence in her invitation that suggested she saw me as more than just the middle-aged gallery owner next door. I found myself standing in front of her building that afternoon, holding the invitation like a teenager with a love note. The converted warehouse had been transformed into a sleek office space with floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed glimpses of modern furniture and walls, covered with environmental charts and photographs of endangered landscapes. She answered, the door in a white linen shirt and dark jeans, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and I felt that familiar flutter of attraction that I'd been trying to ignore for months. Alexa. Her smile was genuine, lighting up her entire face. I'm so glad you came by. Come in, please. Her office was a study in organized chaos scientific journals, stacked on every surface. Maps pinned to walls alongside stunning photographs of pristine wilderness areas, and a massive desk covered with grant applications and environmental impact studies. But what struck me most was how the afternoon light streaming through the windows turned everything golden, including her. Coffee? She offered, moving toward a small kitchenette in the corner. Please. I settled into a chair across from her desk, trying not to stare at the way the sunlight caught in her hair. So tell me about this gala. She launched into an explanation of the foundation's work protecting endangered habitats along the Rio Grande, fighting industrial pollution, promoting sustainable development. Her passion was infectious, the way she spoke with her whole body, gesturing enthusiastically as she described successful conservation projects and ongoing challenges. We're trying to raise funds for a new initiative, she explained, handing me a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. Purchasing land along the river before developers can destroy it. But we also want to change hearts and minds, you know? That's where art comes in. Art? People connect with beauty before they connect with statistics. Show someone a photograph of a pristine wetland and they might appreciate it. Show them that same landscape through an artist's eyes, capture the emotion and the spirit of the place, and they'll fight to protect it. She leaned forward, her green eyes bright with enthusiasm. Your gallery has such a reputation for showcasing meaningful work. I was hoping we could partner on something, maybe feature environmental art alongside our silent auction items. Create an experience that's both fundraising and consciousness-raising. I found myself nodding before I'd fully processed the request. There was something magnetic about her vision, the way she saw connections between art and activism, beauty, and responsibility. But more than that, there was something magnetic about her. It sounds intriguing, I heard myself saying. What did you have in mind? Well, that's where it gets interesting. She smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in her expression. I was thinking we could do something unconventional. Instead of the usual gallery setup with bright lights and white walls, what if we created an experience that connects people to the natural world we're trying to protect? She pulled out a folder filled with sketches and photographs. Picture this: we transform your gallery space to simulate different endangered ecosystems. Dim lighting, natural sounds, interactive displays where people can experience what we're losing. It would be immersive, emotional, unforgettable. The concept was bold, risky even. My gallery had built its reputation on clean, professional presentations that let the artwork speak for itself. What she was proposing would be a complete departure from everything I'd established over the past decade. And yet, looking at her sketches, seeing the passion in her face as she described visitors walking through simulated moonlit forests and desert landscapes, I found myself intrigued by the possibility of doing something completely different. It would require a lot of trust, I said carefully. Transforming the entire space, relying on atmosphere rather than traditional display methods. I know it's asking a lot, she said, her voice softer now. But I have a feeling you're someone who appreciates taking risks for the right cause. The way she looked at me when she said it made my breath catch. There was something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't just talking about the gallery anymore. Give me a few days to think about it, I asked. Of course. But Alexa? She stood as I prepared to leave, moving closer than necessary to hand me the folder of sketches. I hope you'll say yes. I think we could create something beautiful together. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with environmental conservation and everything to do with the electricity I felt whenever she was near. That evening, I spread her sketches across my kitchen table and tried to make a rational decision. The practical part of my brain cataloged all the reasons why this collaboration was risky, the unconventional approach, the potential for technical difficulties, the way it would completely alter my gallery's carefully cultivated image. But the larger part of my brain kept returning to the way she looked at me, the confidence in her voice when she said we could create something beautiful together. Was she talking about the exhibition? About something more personal? At 42, I've learned to read between the lines of professional interactions. But with Sydney, every conversation felt layered with possibilities I wasn't sure I was interpreting correctly. The age difference loomed large in my considerations. 15 years wasn't insurmountable, but it represented different life stages, different reference points, different levels of experience with love and loss, and the complications that came with both. I'd been married and divorced, had built and nearly lost my business. Had learned the hard way that passion without compatibility was a recipe for heartbreak. But Sydney challenged every assumption I'd made about what I wanted from life. Her enthusiasm was contagious, her vision inspiring, and her presence made me feel more alive than I'd felt in years. 3 days later, I called her. "I'm in," I said when she answered. "Let's create something beautiful." The preparation for the gala consumed the next month. Sydney was at the gallery almost daily, overseeing the installation of sound systems and projection equipment, coordinating with artists and environmental scientists, transforming my pristine white space into something wild and immersive. Working with her was intoxicating. She had an artist's eye for detail combined with a scientist's precision, and watching her direct the transformation was like witnessing controlled chaos resolve into perfect harmony. She'd arrive each morning with coffee for both of us, and a new idea that built on the previous day's progress. What if we add actual plant specimens here? She'd suggest, gesturing toward a corner that was being converted into a simulated rainforest. Living representatives of what we're trying to save? Or the lighting in the desert section needs to suggest moonlight, not sunset. People need to feel the mystery, the way the desert comes alive after dark. Every suggestion improved the overall vision, and I found myself deferring to her judgment more and more. She had an intuitive understanding of how to create emotional connections through environmental design that complemented my knowledge of how to present art effectively. But it wasn't just professional admiration that kept me looking forward to her daily visits. It was the way she laughed at my dry observations about the art world. The way she remembered that I preferred my coffee black and always brought me exactly what I needed. The way she'd sometimes touch my arm when she was excited about an idea, her fingers lingering just long enough to make me wonder if the contact was entirely accidental. 2 weeks before the gala, we were working late, adjusting the lighting in what she dubbed the wetland section. The gallery was transformed beyond recognition. Different zones flowed into each other like natural habitats. complete with appropriate sounds and scents and lighting that made visitors feel like they were walking through actual ecosystems rather than viewing art about them. "This is incredible," I said, standing in the center of the space and trying to absorb what we'd created together. "I never would have imagined anything like this." "That's because you were thinking like a gallery owner instead of an experience designer," she said, grinning. "Sometimes you have to break all the rules to create something truly memorable." She was standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that reminded me of spring mornings. The gallery's transformed lighting cast everything in soft, natural tones that made her skin glow and her eyes seem even brighter than usual. "Sydney," I began, not entirely sure what I wanted to say, but feeling the need to acknowledge the tension that had been building between us for weeks. "Alexa." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Are you attracted to me?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. At 27, she had a confidence about emotional matters that I envied. No dancing around implications, no careful testing of boundaries, just honest inquiry that demanded an honest response. "Yes," I said, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. "Very much so. Good," she smiled. "Because I've been wondering if I was imagining the chemistry between us, and it would have been embarrassing to make a move if you weren't interested." "You're thinking about making a move?" Instead of answering with words, she reached up and cupped my face in her hands, studying my expression like she was memorizing it. Then she kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence when I kissed her back. It was like every cliche about fireworks and electricity and the earth moving, except those cliches existed because sometimes they were the only way to describe the overwhelming rightness of a perfect moment. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like the mint tea she'd been drinking all evening. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the day I invited you to coffee," she admitted. "I've wanted you to do that since the day you moved in next door," I confessed. "So what are we going to do about it?" It was a loaded question. What were we going to do about the attraction that had been building between us for months? What were we going to do about the age difference that made some people uncomfortable? What were we going to do about the professional collaboration that was about to culminate in a major public event? "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'd like to find out." She smiled, that radiant expression that had been haunting my thoughts for months. Me too. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect weather that Texas occasionally offers as an apology for its usual extremes. Warm but not hot, clear skies, a gentle breeze that wouldn't disturb the carefully arranged outdoor elements of our exhibition. Sydney arrived at the gallery early, wearing a stunning emerald dress that brought out her eyes and made her look sophisticated beyond her years. She'd pulled her hair up in an elegant chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck, and when she smiled at me across the transformed space, I felt that familiar flutter of attraction combined with something deeper pride in what we'd accomplished together. "You look beautiful," I told her, meaning it completely. "So do you," she replied, and the way she looked at me made me feel beautiful despite my 42 years and the fine lines that no amount of expensive skincare could completely erase. The guests began arriving at 7, and their reactions exceeded our most optimistic expectations. The transformed gallery created exactly the kind of immersive experience Sydney had envisioned. People moved through the different ecological zones with wonder and reverence, stopping to examine artwork that seemed to emerge naturally from the simulated environments. I watched Sydney work the room with the skill of someone much more experienced at fundraising events. She could speak knowledgeably with scientists about habitat restoration, passionately with activists about policy changes, and accessibly with donors about the emotional importance of conservation work. She was magnetic, drawing people into conversations that left them more committed to environmental causes than they'd been when they arrived. But throughout the evening, I caught her looking at me across the room, sharing private smiles that made my pulse quicken despite the professional setting. The silent auction was a tremendous success, raising more money than the foundation had projected for their land acquisition project. The combination of environmental art and immersive experience had created exactly the kind of emotional connection Sydney had predicted, inspiring generosity that went beyond typical charity contributions. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Sydney and I found ourselves alone in the transformed gallery, surrounded by the remnants of a successful event and the knowledge that we'd created something truly special together. We did it, she said, spinning around in the center of the space with her arms outstretched. We actually pulled it off. You pulled it off, I corrected. This was your vision from the beginning. It was our collaboration, she said firmly. I couldn't have done this without your expertise, your space, your willingness to take a risk on something completely unconventional. She moved closer, and in the dim lighting of the transformed gallery, she looked like something from a dream, beautiful and ethereal and impossibly young. Alexa, there's something I need to tell you about the evening. Something in her tone made me pay attention, a seriousness that hadn't been there during the celebration. What is it? The power situation, it wasn't an accident. I stared at her, not understanding. What power situation? She looked almost embarrassed. I had the main electrical supply to the gallery temporarily disconnected this afternoon. The dim lighting, the atmospheric effects, they weren't just artistic choices. I wanted to create an environment where we'd have to rely on alternative lighting, where people would be drawn together by the intimacy of the space. You deliberately cut the power to my gallery? Just the main grid connection. All the essential systems are running on backup power, climate control, security, the sound equipment. Everything important is protected. But I wanted the evening to feel different, magical, like we were creating something that could only exist in this specific moment. I should have been angry. Should have been outraged that she'd manipulated the technical aspects of the event without my knowledge or consent. But looking around at the transformed space, seeing how the reduced lighting had indeed created an atmosphere of intimacy and wonder, I found myself more impressed than upset. You tricked me into hosting a candlelit environmental gala. I tricked you into letting me create the perfect romantic setting for our first real evening together, she said, stepping close enough that I could see her pulse jumping at the base of her throat. Was that presumptuous of me? Incredibly presumptuous, I agreed. Also incredibly effective. She smiled, that mischievous expression I was learning to associate with her more ambitious ideas. So you're not angry? I should be. Manipulating the infrastructure of my business, making technical decisions without consulting me, assuming I'd be okay with your creative liberties, But it worked. The evening was magical, the fundraising exceeded expectations, and you've shown me that sometimes the best results come from taking risks I'd never consider on my own. She reached for my hands, intertwining our fingers in the gesture that was becoming familiar and precious to me. Alexa, I need you to know that this isn't just about the attraction, or the excitement of working together, or even the success of tonight's event. What is it about? It's about the way you make me feel like my wildest ideas are possible. It's about how you bring experience and wisdom to my enthusiasm. How you make me want to be more thoughtful and strategic about the causes I care about. It's about how I've never met anyone who challenges me intellectually while making me feel completely accepted emotionally. Her words hit me like a physical force, cutting through every defense I'd built around my heart over the past decade. This brilliant, passionate, impossibly young woman was telling me that she saw in me everything I'd hoped to be but had stopped believing I could inspire in someone else. Sydney, the age difference, it doesn't matter to me if it doesn't matter to you, she said firmly. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me or teach me about life. I'm looking for someone to build a life with, someone whose dreams complement my own, someone who makes me excited about the future we could create together. She pulled me closer until we were standing in the center of the transformed gallery with only inches between us. Are you that someone, Alexa? I thought about all the reasons why this was complicated, risky, potentially problematic. I thought about the gossip we'd face, the professional scrutiny, the challenges of bridging different life stages and experiences. Then I thought about the way she made me laugh, the way her passion inspired my own creativity, the way she'd taken my carefully controlled gallery and helped me transform it into something wild and beautiful and unprecedented. I want to be, I said honestly. But Sydney, I need you to understand what you're getting into. I'm set in some of my ways. I've been hurt before, and I'm probably more cautious about love than someone your age. I have a business to run and a reputation to maintain, and I can't promise that dating someone 15 years younger won't complicate both of those things. I understand all of that, she said, and I need you to understand that I'm not looking for easy or simple or socially conventional. I'm looking for real. I'm looking for someone who sees the world the way I do, who wants to build something meaningful and beautiful and lasting. She kissed me then, soft and sure, and I felt 15 years of careful emotional control dissolve in the face of her certainty. When we broke apart, she was smiling. Besides, she added with a grin, I think we've already proven we work well together when we're creating something unconventional. And that's how I found myself, at 42, falling head over heels for a 27-year-old environmental consultant who tricked me into hosting a gala in the dark and somehow convinced me that age was just a number when you found someone who made your heart race and your imagination soar. The next few months were a whirlwind of discovery. Dating Sydney was like being handed a map to territories I'd forgotten existed. She approached everything with curiosity and enthusiasm, trying new restaurants, exploring hiking trails I'd never noticed, attending concerts and art exhibitions and environmental lectures that broadened my perspective on the world. But more than that, she approached our relationship with an openness that challenged my carefully developed habits of emotional self-protection. She asked direct questions about my past relationships, my fears, my dreams for the future. She shared her own vulnerabilities with a trust that was both humbling and terrifying. I've never been with someone who's been married before, she told me one evening as we walked along the Rio Grande, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and orange. Sometimes I wonder if I can offer you anything you haven't already experienced. You offer me things I never knew I wanted, I replied honestly. Your perspective on the world, your optimism about what's possible, your ability to see potential where I see problems. You make me feel like I'm still learning, still growing, still capable of being surprised by life. And you offer me stability without stagnation, she said. Experience without cynicism. You make me feel like my dreams are grounded in reality, like the changes I want to make in the world are actually achievable. It was conversations like these that made me realize our age difference wasn't a barrier to overcome, but a complement that strengthened what we were building together. She brought energy and innovation to my experience and caution. I brought perspective and patience to her passion and urgency. The gallery began reflecting our partnership in subtle ways. I started featuring more environmental art, hosting lectures and workshops that connected artistic expression with activism. Sydney's network of scientists and conservationists became regular visitors, and my established collectors found themselves exposed to causes and perspectives they'd never considered. You're changing, my assistant Maria observed one afternoon as I reviewed applications for an upcoming exhibition focused on climate change art. Not in a bad way, she added quickly. You seem more alive, I guess, more engaged with new possibilities. She was right. Sydney's influence had awakened parts of my personality that I'd suppressed in the name of professional propriety. I was taking risks, both personally and professionally, that the old me would have considered reckless, which made what happened 6 months after the gala so much more devastating. I was in my office reviewing grant applications when Maria knocked on my door, her expression troubled. Alexa, there's something on the news you need to see. She turned on the small television I kept for background noise during long afternoons, and I found myself staring at a reporter standing in front of the Rio Grande Environmental Foundation offices. Allegations of financial impropriety have rocked the local environmental community, the reporter was saying. Documents obtained by the station suggest that Foundation executive Sydney Martin may have diverted funds intended for land conservation to personal accounts. The rest of the report blurred together in a haze of shock and disbelief. Accusations of embezzlement, evidence of unauthorized transactions, calls for investigation by state environmental agencies. They showed Sydney's photograph alongside financial documents that allegedly proved her guilt. I called her immediately, but the phone went straight to voicemail. I drove to her office, but the building was locked and dark. I tried her apartment, but no one answered the door. For 3 days, Sydney Martin had vanished. The scandal dominated local news and social media. The environmental community was divided between those who refused to believe the allegations and those who felt betrayed by someone they trusted with their donations and support. My gallery, having hosted the Foundation's major fundraising event, was mentioned in several news reports as potentially complicit in the alleged fraud. I received calls from reporters, concerned collectors, and board members of other arts organizations, asking if I'd known about Sydney's supposed financial irregularities. The implication was clear. How could I have been so naive as to partner with someone who'd allegedly been stealing from environmental causes, but I knew Sydney. I'd worked with her, dated her, fallen in love with her passion for protecting the natural world. The woman who'd spent weeks transforming my gallery to create emotional connections between art and conservation wasn't someone who'd steal from the very causes she championed. On the fourth day, she finally called. "Alexa, I'm so sorry," she said, and I could hear exhaustion and defeat in her voice. "I couldn't contact you earlier because I've been with lawyers trying to figure out how to prove that I didn't do what they're saying I did." "Where are you?" "At my sister's house in Austin. I can't come back to Laredo until this is sorted out. The foundation has suspended me pending investigation, and there are reporters camped outside my apartment." "Sydney, tell me what really happened." "I don't know," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Someone gained access to the foundation's accounts and made transfers that looked like I authorized them. But I didn't, Alexa. I would never steal money from conservation projects." "You have to believe me." "I do believe you," I said without hesitation. "What can I do to help?" "Nothing." "That's the worst part. There's nothing anyone can do except wait for the investigation to prove my innocence. But in the meantime, my reputation is destroyed. The foundation's work is compromised, and everyone who trusted me is questioning their judgment, including me." "Especially you," she said quietly. "Alexa, I'm so sorry this is affecting the gallery. I never wanted my problems to touch your business or your reputation. My reputation can handle some controversy. The question is whether our relationship can handle this kind of pressure." There was a long pause before she answered. "I don't know. I can't ask you to stand by me when I don't know how long this investigation will take or whether I'll be able to clear my name. I can't ask you to risk everything you've built for someone who might not be able to prove her innocence." "You're not asking, I'm choosing." Another pause. "Alexa, Sydney, listen to me. 6 months ago, you convinced me to transform my gallery into something I'd never imagined, to take risks I'd never considered, to trust in a vision that seemed impossible. You've taught me that the most beautiful things come from collaboration, from believing in something bigger than individual success." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would define not just our relationship, but the kind of person I wanted to be. "I'm not going to abandon you because things got complicated. I'm going to figure out how to prove your innocence, and we're going to get through this together." That's how I found myself at 42, playing amateur detective to save the reputation of the 27-year-old woman I'd fallen in love with. It wasn't the kind of romantic adventure I'd imagined when we first kissed in the darkened gallery, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that revealed what our partnership was really made of. I started by examining the foundation's financial records, using my business experience to trace the suspicious transactions. Sydney had given me access to everything, trusting me completely with information that could either prove her innocence or confirm her guilt. What I found was subtle but damning evidence of sophisticated financial manipulation. Someone with advanced knowledge of the foundation systems had created a trail of transactions that perfectly mimicked Sydney's authorization patterns while directing funds to accounts that appeared to be under her control. But the more I studied the evidence, the more convinced I became that Sydney was being framed. The timing of the transactions coincided with her public appearances at environmental conferences, making it impossible for her to have physically authorized them. The accounts receiving the funds were established using information that would have been difficult for Sydney to access, but easy for someone with administrative privileges at the foundation. I spent 3 weeks following paper trails, interviewing foundation staff, and building a case for Sydney's innocence. It was exhausting, frustrating work that required skills I'd never thought I'd need. But it was also deeply satisfying, using my analytical abilities to protect someone I loved. The breakthrough came when I discovered that the foundation's former bookkeeper, recently fired for poor performance, had maintained access to financial systems for weeks after his termination. Cross-referencing his access logs with the suspicious transactions revealed a pattern that clearly implicated him in the embezzlement scheme. "You did it," Sydney said when I called her with the evidence. "Alexa, you actually proved my innocence." "We did it," I corrected. This was teamwork, just like everything else we've accomplished together. The foundation's board reviewed my findings and immediately reinstated Sydney with a public apology. The real embezzler was arrested and charged, and the stolen funds were recovered. Sydney's reputation was not only cleared, but enhanced by the revelation of how she'd been victimized by someone she'd trusted. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. Standing by Sydney during the darkest period of her career had tested our relationship in ways that no amount of normal dating could have prepared us for. We'd learned that we could trust each other completely, support each other through crisis, and emerge stronger from challenges that might have destroyed a less committed partnership. I have an idea, Sydney said the night she returned to Laredo as we stood once again in my gallery, now restored to its normal configuration but somehow forever changed by what we'd created there together. I'm almost afraid to ask, I replied, though I was smiling. What if we made the environmental art program permanent? Not just occasional exhibitions, but an ongoing partnership between the gallery and conservation organizations. Art that doesn't just decorate walls, but changes minds and inspires action. It was exactly the kind of ambitious, risky, potentially transformative idea that I'd learned to associate with Sydney Martin. The kind of proposal that the old me would have declined politely while the new me found irresistible. I think that sounds like the beginning of something beautiful, I said. She kissed me then in the gallery where we'd first acknowledged our attraction, surrounded by the art that had brought us together and the dreams we were still building. You know what I love most about you? She asked. What? You make me believe that the impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been tried yet. And that's my story. That's how a 42-year-old gallery owner fell for a 27-year-old environmental consultant who tricked her into hosting a gala in the dark and then trusted her to prove her innocence when the world turned against her. We're still together, still building something beautiful and unconventional and occasionally risky. The gallery has become a model for how art can serve activism, and Sydney's foundation continues to protect endangered habitats throughout Texas and beyond. But more than that, we've learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life. It's about finding someone who inspires you to create a life you never knew you wanted. Someone who makes you brave enough to turn off the lights and trust that you'll find your way together in the dark. Sometimes the most beautiful things can only be seen when you're willing to step away from the bright, safe, conventional lighting and trust someone else to guide you towards something extraordinary. That's what Sydney taught me. That's what we taught each other. And that's why, even now, I'm still willing to follow her into the darkness, knowing that whatever we create together will be worth the risk of not being able to see where we're going.